Okay, so we're back now thinking about the next layer to program design and the next layer to the elements of the program in that hierarchy that we were talking about in the previous video. Moving on, we would move to considering your frequency that this athlete is going to work out, and maybe even thinking about the frequency like at a micromanagement level of just like movements that they're going to do, or even like how many times you're going to stimulate a muscle group within that program. Generally, we split the frequency up based off like the client. So, we always talk about this training age of the client and obviously the goals that they want and their level of commitment as well. Some people can only train 3 times a week. Most of the people that we work with are willing to train 4 to 6 times a week. They want to get strong, they want to have more muscle, they want to be leaner. So, the approach to training and I guess the way where it sits in their priority levels is really high. So typically for these people, you're going to start with a baseline program maybe 4 times a week, which you'd achieve really, really good results. If you're a beginner, you can train a little bit less than that. You can train probably 3 times a week. It's just what you do on the other times in that week would still matter for the results that you want to get. If you're an intermediate or an advanced athlete, like I said before, about 4 to 5 times a week is generally the sweet spot. And then in some instances, with a more extreme goal, in acute circumstances, you may have that workout frequency go up to about 6 times per week. Now, if we were to split up that frequency into, I guess, like goals, we talk about, physique programming and strength programming. So generally for physique programming, the frequency is a little bit higher just because you can split the muscle groups up. We can think about exercise selection, which we're going to talk about later, where we can kind of like, just use machines and stuff like that to get more volume in. That doesn't tax the system too much. For a strength athlete, because they're getting exposed to heavier loads, it's more barbell work, it's more free weighted work, it's a little bit more eccentric loading, those kind of things. There's a little bit more stress on the joints and it just needs a little bit more time to kind of recover from the movements. And those movements are really complex as well. So it just takes more time to recover from that altogether. So generally you would see in some instances even 3 sessions a week, but only in acute circumstances again, but generally about 4 training sessions a week is the sweet spot. It's like we need to have enough recovery, but enough time in the gym to get good at the exercise and drive those adaptations that we want. So then we move to like how much work does this person or can this person do in a week? Now, the more I look at this stuff, the more I try and find the answers to it. There really is no specific definitive number that's going to be the sweet spot for everybody, because how much volume someone does in a training session or in a training week is really influenced on their skill, their training age, their commitment outside of the gym, their social and personal responsibilities and all of those kind of things, and that all affects their recovery capacity. However, what we can do is give people general guidelines. So in most instances, like I guess like a beginner athlete or a beginner trainee, especially in a physique setting, would probably respond well to about 60 to 80 sets per week. We can divide that up over whatever they want to, but generally we use our prime muscle groups as like your chest, shoulders, your quads, your hamstrings, your back, and your bis and tris and your calves. So if we can get most of the work done in those areas, for most people as a beginner, it's like you'll get a large degree of change to their physique. As that person becomes more advanced, obviously they can take more volume. So generally that 60 to 80 could change to 80 to 100 sets per week, and we can start to distribute that volume with like intentions to start to make that physique more symmetrical, developed in a certain way. So then all muscle groups are on deck. Then we don't just have these prime ones. We've got things like their glutes, we've got things like their traps, their abs, or something like that to add on top of those prime muscle groups, because that's when we can really start to see, okay, like from a development perspective, we need to start to shift some work here and there. And then advanced athletes, to be honest, can do a wide variety of volume. They can train in really low volumes, and they can train in really high volumes too, because they've got a large amount of muscle mass, large degree of commitment. Their recovery capacity is high because they take their training seriously. So there really is no single one volume allocation for everybody, but I think the best thing to do is start with the lowest amount and build yourself up, because you can always add more. And as long as you're assessing the right metrics, you can make that determination. It's like if you're recovering well, ticking all the boxes with everything you need to do outside the gym, you feel like you can do more, add a little bit more, and then reassess from there. Now, when it comes to strength training, there's huge nuances in terms of volume and stuff. Again, you always want to start with the lowest amount, and it's going to be specific to the training phase that you're in. So we can't really give you a definitive answer here either, because it's like if you're in a hybrid phase, it's like you're going to be doing some voluminous work, you're going to be doing a little bit of skill work to kind of keep your proficiency for your main lifts. If you're in a strength phase, you're going to be doing lesser volume because you're doing heavier loads. If you're in a peaking program, you're going to be doing even less because you're just really focusing on squat, bench, and deadlift, for example. So there is a lot of nuances within that. But again, it's about like picking a degree of volume for a client and making sure that person has the capacity to recover from all of that work. Because if we overshoot and we overshoot for too long, that's when we can start to see overtraining and over fatigue kick in, and that can have a really negative effect from somebody long term, not just physically, but mentally as well. So next thing we need to consider is the rest and the rest intervals that people take in between their training sessions, which is something that's going to be debated for a really long time and something that we're probably going to change in terms of our stance and stuff as we ask more questions and as research becomes more prominent. Now, if we are training for body composition, we're trying to lift as much as possible, preserve our muscle mass, maybe drive some hypertrophy and muscular development. What we're starting to see now is a favoritism towards longer rest periods, because if we rest longer, we put ourselves in a favorable position to be fully recovered and lift as much weight as possible. Now, I guess you go back, maybe 5-10 years ago, maybe a little bit longer, there was this idea that, shorter rest periods were favorable. I guess like that effort or that perceived effort was increased. From a fiber recruitment perspective, maybe they thought if we were slightly under recovered that we would recruit more. But we found out now that if we are under recovered, that we actually don't get that full recruitment, which means performance is going to drop. And I guess long-term performance is our highest virtue. So we do want to make sure that we are getting fully recovered and resting adequately to perform the next task. So generally it's about 2 to 3 minutes. If we were to draw a line in it for most body composition, physique programming parameters, not really lifting any lower than 5 reps in most instances. So about a 2 to 3, maybe a little bit longer rest period is probably advisable. Now that can go right up to your high rep training as well. You can rest 2 to 3 minutes sufficiently to try to perform the best you can. Now, not everybody has the luxury of just all of the time in the world to train. This is where we would want to standardize a rest period, make sure that, or just get like inventive with their programming. Maybe we do some antagonistic supersets, push and pull or upper and lower, and we can give that person adequate time, but they're still utilizing their time in the gym really well so that they can get, the best environment to train. There are instances where I guess we're doing single jointed exercises, maybe some isolation movements, maybe some machines, things that are probably less taxing overall, less stress on the joints, more stimulus on the target tissue. We can probably scale that rest period down and shorten that window a little bit, but I still think at all points, if we were to maximize our results, we are favoriting longer rest periods right now. And that could change, just as we ask more questions and research comes out. Now, from a strength perspective, we're going to be working in lower rep ranges in a lot of cases, and we're going to be using the neuromuscular system and stressing that out. So that takes a little bit longer to recover. The nervous system needs a bit more time to be able to maximally recruit and I guess switch the lights on for you to move a really large amount of weight across maybe 1 to 3 to 5 reps. So those rest periods can be 5, 7. Some instances, if you're really well trained and you're doing singles or doubles, you could rest up to 10 minutes. And again, it sways towards that we need to be fully recovered in order to maximally perform, and in this instance, do it safely too. Because when you're lifting with heavier loads, you don't have the luxury of making a mistake. When you lift with lighter loads, it's you do one bad rep, it's not a big deal. If you're doing a press or something, it's oh, that was a bit wonky. It's the weight's that light that you can control that. So we do need to take that into consideration when we are resting. If you're a time-sensitive strength athlete, I'd probably pick another sport. Especially a powerlifter. It's if you got time-sensitive workouts and you're a powerlifter, it's just might need to reconsider your overall commitment, because you do want to make sure that those rest periods are really large. And then I guess the same thing, as the rep range goes up and as the load goes down, we can start to move to that 2 to 3 minute window as a rough guideline. And in some instances, when we're doing things like smaller movements, accessories, maybe even some isolation movements in certain programs, we can bring those rest periods down to maybe 1 to 2 minutes or something like that. The other consideration, or the thing that people miss the mark on when they're strength training or when they're programming, is that there's huge elements of skill and skill acquisition in their programming. So that is when you want to be in a non-fatigue state, and you don't really want the effort to be too high either, because you are mastering the exercise and you're teaching your body how to perform this exercise in the best way possible. So you would want to make sure in that instance that person is fully rested as well. If they're Failing at an exercise, if they don't have the skill of that movement and you want to improve it, don't put them in an environment where it's super challenging and they're super fatigued, because those two things are not how we learn.